Luis had been battling cancer for 10 years, and I had spent all my savings to accompany him through the treatments. Just when he was about to recover, I discovered that he had hired a lawyer to draft a will. I stood at the door, listening as Luis carefully spoke each word of the will. After my death, my biological children and their mother Selena will have the right to inherit all of my assets. His childhood friend Selena stood by, holding a little boy and crying. I clutched the discharge certificate, gritting my teeth as I stared at that family of 3 in the room. My heart felt like it had turned to ashes. System, what punishment will I face if I give up on the mission? I braced myself to be erased, asking the system's lazy voice sounded. Oh, I forgot to tell you. If the mission fails, it's Luis who will be erased. Chapter 1. I walked into the hospital room holding the discharge diagnosis. Selena immediately pulled herself away from Luis's embrace. She awkwardly hugged the young boy beside her. Seeing her wipe away her tears, I forced myself to suppress the bitterness in my heart and smiled as I spoke. Miss Selena, why are you crying? I turned my gaze to Luis on the bed. Luis, what did you do to upset Miss Selena? Luis's gaze faltered, his face unable to hide his guilt. He didn't answer my question, instead furrowing his brows and asking, "How did you get in here?" His tone was sharp and impatient. Before I could respond, the young boy pointed at me and shouted, "Who are you? How did you get into my dad's hospital room?" Selena's face instantly turned pale as she looked at Luis. Luis's eyes flashed with panic for a moment before he cleared his throat and tried to explain. Diana, don't misunderstand. The child is just talking nonsense. My hands were shoved into my pockets, tightly clutching my fists, with my nails digging into my palms. This pain was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. Today, I realized just how pathetic I truly was. I had been married to Luis for 15 years, and we had never had children of our own. For this, I always felt guilty toward him. He had always comforted me. Diana, as long as we love each other, that's enough. A child is just an accessory to love. For years, I thought I was living in his love. I never once thought that he had already had a child of his own. The child appeared to be over 10 years old. No wonder he didn't care. I forced a smile. It's okay. The child probably doesn't even know who his father is. How pitiful. Selena glared at me while holding the boy. Luis, the discharge papers are ready. We can go home tomorrow. I looked at him, feigning ease. Thank you for your hard work, Diana. Luis looked at me tenderly. I turned and walked out of the hospital room, not paying any attention to Selena and her child. The door was slightly ajar, and I stood by it like a thief, eavesdropping on the sounds inside. Selena, we've both endured so much over these 15 years. If it hadn't been for Diana keeping an eye on us back then, I wouldn't have let you and your son stay with me without any recognition. Selena nestled into Luis's embrace again. Luis, I don't care about the inheritance. I just want to grow old with you, to be with you forever. But over the years, Diana has sacrificed so much for me. I can't let her down. So I can only make you suffer. The young boy stood by their side, holding Luis's hand tightly and saying the same thing. Dad, I just want us to be a family of 3, always together. I crouched by the door, watching the 3 of them embrace and cry, suddenly feeling like I wasn't worth it. For the past 15 years, I had put everything of Luis's first, even when he was diagnosed with cancer. With only a 30% survival rate, I stayed by his side. But in the end, I became the villain who destroyed his relationship with his childhood friend. I laughed bitterly, tired, and summoned the system. I still can't make Luis love me, I said, feeling dejected. If I give up on the mission, when will I be erased? After a few seconds, the system's lazy voice appeared in my mind. You won't be erased. Failure in the mission? That's definitely the target's fault. So, it's Luis who will be erased. The system's voice had a lazy, electronic sound to it, slightly distorted. I froze for a moment, processing this news. So, if I give up on the mission now, how long will it take for him to be erased? I closed my eyes, my voice tinged with bitterness. There are 5 days left until your wedding anniversary. It'll be soon. Chapter 2. The next afternoon, Luis was discharged from the hospital. I made up an excuse and didn't go to pick him up, staying home to clean the house instead. Over the years, I had spent most of my time at the hospital, and the house had hardly been lived in. Now that he was coming back to stay, I had to tidy up. By evening, Luis still hadn't come home. I sat at the dining table, staring at the cold food, scrolling through my phone. Suddenly, his call came through. The background noise on the other end was loud, with music playing. It sounded like some kind of party. I called out a few times, but no one answered. Just as I was about to hang up, a soft, coquettish voice appeared. Luis, you're discharged but didn't come home. You're throwing me this birthday party, won't Diana be upset? It was Selena. Right after, there was the voice of a teenager going through puberty. Mom, my dad doesn't need to keep playing pretend with that woman. For all these years, the three of us haven't been able to live together. The house hasn't felt like home, all thanks to that bitch. I hate her. Luis sighed and spoke in a gentle tone. Lucas, you can't say that about Aunt Diana. She is family to your father, and she will always be your family too. Remember, I've always taught you to be polite. You can't say such rude things. He then comforted Selena. Don't worry. I told her I have something to take care of at the company. She doesn't know. Selena's voice rose, sounding as sweet as can be. Luis, you're so wonderful. I knew it. The one you love most is me. Of course. If I didn't love you, who else would I love? Luis's deep voice said this in such a seductive way. But to me, it was the ultimate mockery. The call was suddenly disconnected. It felt like those piercing words were just a figment of my imagination. I sat alone at the dining table, numb. The food on the table had a layer of cold oil on top. I mechanically stuffed bite after bite into my mouth. The cold grease wrapped around the back of my tongue. The food piled up in my throat, choking me until tears streamed down my face. With a dry cough, I rushed to the bathroom and threw up, even though I had made the decision to give up on pursuing Luis. That one phone call still made my heart ache. Nearly 20 years of feelings couldn't be erased overnight. I still held on to a sliver of hope for him. Now that unrealistic expectation was gone, completely shattered. I lay on the couch, half dreaming and half awake. The room was pitch dark, with only the moonlight coming in through the window. A body, smelling of alcohol, wrapped around me. Diana, why are you sleeping so early today? Luis's gentle voice came from behind my neck, his hand tenderly stroking my cheek. Where did you go today? I couldn't help but ask. Luis hesitated for a moment before responding evasively. The company had a meeting. I thought I told you. Stop being so paranoid all the time. It's not good for your health. His tone became impatient. I forced myself to suppress the bitterness inside. Luis, would you lie to me? He seemed clearly stunned. Diana, you're the most important person to me. Why would I lie to you? Who's the father of Selena's child? He fell silent for a moment before suddenly sitting up, turning his back to me, looking angry. I told you when she came back. The child's father is already dead. After all these years, you're still obsessed with this issue. Do you not trust me? In the darkness of the night, all my senses, except for sight, were heightened. I could clearly feel Luis's guilt and unease, because, without realizing it, he had raised his voice. Luis, cursing yourself like that. Aren't you afraid it will come true one day? I was too tired to argue with him, so I held back the bitterness in my throat and spoke. After that, I stood up and walked toward the bedroom. Luis suddenly stood up, trying to grab me, but I pulled away from him. Diana, I explained this to you over 10 years ago. Lucas's father died in an accident. You've never doubted me all these years. So why are you suddenly acting like this? Chapter 3. I stopped in my tracks and turned to look at him. When I first met Luis, I was drawn to his looks. Back then, he was the pride of the heavens, a wealthy young master, with the air of someone destined for greatness, and I was just a poor student living on scholarships. Most of the students at school were either rich or noble, and to them, I was an outsider. They bullied me without restraint. They glued my chair, put bugs in my desk, and even threw my backpack in the toilet. Luis was the only exception. He walked into the restroom with a dark expression, fished my backpack out of the toilet, handed it to me, and took me to clean it up. Later, he said I was the person he would protect. At that time, he was the only god in my eyes. After graduation, Luis gave up everything to start a business with Selena, choosing to be with her. It was then that, for the sake of money, I linked up with the system to pursue him. He and Selena loved each other deeply, and I could only remain by his side as a humble simp. Later, in an attempt to save the family company, Selena embezzled money from Luis's company. After the company went bankrupt, Selena fled abroad. I quit my job to stay by Luis's side and help him start over. Now, nearly 20 years have passed. We are no longer young and have entered middle age. After 10 years of illness, Luis now has a few strands of white hair at his temples, but his aura of being the chosen one is still undeniable. His facial features are even more defined, and his eyes have grown deeper. But perhaps, those eyes never once held me in them. So, even if I really am Lucas's father, what does it matter? Luis pulled me close, his gaze icy, looking at me with disdain. You've never had children all these years. So what's wrong with me having a son for myself? When those words came from his mouth, I felt the chill spread all over my body. Before we got married, the premarital checkup revealed that I had difficulty conceiving. Even so, Luis married me without hesitation. When he was diagnosed with cancer, I ran around, managing his company and accompanying him through treatments. The child came and left without my knowing. At that time, he held me with a face full of guilt and sadness, silently shedding tears. Diana, everything I have is yours. I will never betray you in this lifetime. Back then, I thought my sincerity had finally been seen. But now, he used those mocking words to hurt me. I was so angry that I trembled all over, tears falling from the corners of my eyes, dripping onto his hand. He seemed to be burned by the tears, quickly pulling me into his arms and softly soothing me. Sorry, Diana. I shouldn't have brought this up. I summoned all my strength to break free from his embrace and slapped him across the face. You really disgust me. My stomach was cramping in sharp waves, and my heart ached along with it. For the past 20 years, I had asked the system countless times if Luis had ever fallen in love with me. The answer was always no. It was only now that I finally woke up to the truth. Luis had always loved Selena. I was just his family. That night, Luis didn't enter the bedroom. He sat by the door the entire night. Not until dawn did he receive a phone call and quickly leave. I didn't care where he went, but someone would eventually tell me. Selena purposely sent me a message. Luis is at the hospital with Lucas, taking him to see the doctor. Diana, you know Lucas is Luis's son. I advise you to divorce him as soon as possible. In the photo, Luis had a worried look on his face, holding the young boy's hand. Even his hair seemed to exude the tenderness of a father. I didn't reply. I simply closed my phone calmly and buried my head in the blankets. The lazy electronic voice rang in my mind again. Host. There are 3 days left until the target is erased. You can choose the method of erasure. I blankly stared at the ceiling, then let him die in an accident. Chapter 4. It seemed that Luis was avoiding me. He hadn't come back for 2 days. But in those 2 days, the news about him never stopped. Selena eagerly updated her social media, deliberately not blocking me. At first, I'd check a few posts, but over time, I grew numb to them and eventually blocked her. I organized Luis's things, neatly placing them in the study. Then, I went out to find a lawyer, intending to recover the money he had spent on Selena over the years. It wasn't until the evening of the last day that I received his message. Where are you? I'll come pick you up. I pressed my lips together and ignored the message. By the time I got home, it was already dark. When I opened the front door, I was met with a mess on the floor. Clothes from both a man and a woman were scattered everywhere. There were also a few empty bottles of wine in the living room. Once again, I stood at the door like a thief, listening to the sounds inside. Luis, I'm wearing Diana's pajamas. Are you happy now? Selena asked. Selena, I love you so much, Luis replied. Won't Diana find out? I feel so guilty about this. Don't worry, baby. She doesn't know where she is. And she won't be back. Focus. Baby. I heard these few words and felt so sick that I ran straight to the bathroom and threw up. For the first time, I confronted the reality of my husband's infidelity, and I felt no pain. My heart had long since died. Only disgust remained. At that moment, the system reappeared. Host. Emotional analysis of the target shows feelings of guilt toward you. I scoffed. He only feels guilty toward his own conscience. When has he ever had me in his heart? With that, I turned and went to the guest room. I didn't know how long they had been at it, but suddenly the master bedroom door opened. Luis urged Selena to hurry and leave. Selena kept insisting that he take her out. When the house finally quieted down, I opened the door with disgust. The clothes in the living room had been cleaned up. My pajamas were in the laundry basket. Frowning, I threw the clothes in the trash. The front door suddenly opened, and Luis stood there, surprised to see me. Diana, when did you come back? I replied seriously. Just now. Luis walked toward me apologetically, trying to hug me. I saw the hickey on his neck and took a few steps back. Say whatever you need to say here, Diana. I'm sorry for what I said that day. Suddenly, I remembered our wedding day. A few wealthy young men had surrounded him, mocking me for not being able to have children. Are you really going to marry this hen who can't lay eggs? Diana is just a pathetic simp who managed to get to the top. If you want, you could find someone better. Back in school, she looked so shabby. Not being able to have children is a blessing. At least she won't ruin your family's genes. Luis had stood silently in the middle of these people, never defending me. It was as if he was silently agreeing with their insults. But now, his face was full of apology, his eyes full of carefulness, as if he were begging for my forgiveness. I wondered if he even remembered his silence back then. I smiled lightly. It's fine. I slapped you, so we're even. I went to the kitchen to pour myself some water. The pajama in the laundry basket. Luis's posture stiffened noticeably. I remember it was the first gift you ever gave me. After so many years, the clothes had worn out, so I threw them away. You don't mind, do you? I smiled at him, my eyes full of relief. Luis stood frozen for a moment before nodding, maybe sensing something was off. He followed me to the guest room. He locked me in his embrace, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. Diana, the last 2 days, I've felt too ashamed to face you. So, I interrupted him. Luis, do you love me? He paused, forced a smile, and said, why ask something like that? It seems you don't love me. I said this flatly. No, Diana, we've been married for so many years. Love has long been worn away. His tone suddenly became flustered, eager to explain. You are the most important person in my life. The one I'm closest to. I didn't respond, only saying, let's sleep. During the night, he slept restlessly, calling my name in his sleep. When he woke from a nightmare, he would hold me, asking if I was going to leave him. I didn't sleep all night. The next day, Luis woke up early and, for the first time, made me breakfast. I glanced at it indifferently and said I wasn't hungry. Planning to leave, Diana. He suddenly called out, hesitating, then asking, why have all my things been packed? I responded with an "oh" and casually said, those things have been used for many years. I plan to get you some new ones. With that, I walked out the door. Today was Luis's last day on this earth. I sat in the office, waiting for the news of his death. By now, my heart no longer had the dull pain it used to feel. Torn apart, I had already let go, only feeling a sense of joy at the impending relief. At 2:40 p.m., Luis was in a severe car accident on his way to visit his illegitimate child. He was sent to the hospital, but resuscitation efforts failed. Luis was finally dead. When I got the news, I was daydreaming in the office. The system's distorted voice sounded, congratulations, host. The target has been successfully erased. 50 million yuan has been transferred to your account. We wish you a pleasant life. Before I could react, the system disappeared from my mind. No matter how much I called out, it wouldn't return. It was then that I realized, this 20-year-long mission had finally ended. I hadn't completed the mission, In these 20 years, there were no winners. Chapter 5. Luis's funeral was simple. I stood in the mourning hall, dressed in black, solemnly exchanging pleasantries with the relatives and friends who came to pay their respects. It was during this time that Selena stormed in, bringing along the boy named Lucas. Diana, why did you take away the inheritance Luis left for us? Mother and son? Selena, holding the will in her hand, stood there frantically shouting in the mourning hall. The guests were all watching us. Some were surprised. Others were gossiping, waiting for the next act in this drama. I scoffed and took the will from her hand, casually tossing it into the fire pit. Selena and the illegitimate child screamed and lunged at the fire pit, trying to retrieve the will, but they were burned by the flames that started to rise. The expensive fur on Selena's body was instantly torn with a large hole. Diana, how dare you burn the will? Selena pointed at me and began to curse, showing none of the gentle, rational, and independent demeanor she usually had. Since her return to the country, for over 10 years in Luis's company, she had always portrayed herself this way. Because this will is invalid. I brushed the ashes off my body and said indifferently, impossible. This is the will Luis personally had a lawyer draft in the hospital. You were there that day too. I sneered at the mother and son. The will says that Luis's assets are to be inherited by his biological son and his mother. But Luis didn't have any assets under his name. Selena's face turned pale as she stared at me, screaming, didn't all the money for Luis's treatment come from you over the years? That was marital property. The lawyer standing beside me suddenly spoke up. Mr. Luis did not do a property notarization before the marriage, nor did he have a property division with his wife before his death. Selena staggered a step back. If it weren't for her son supporting her, Selena would have almost fallen. I am Luis's son. According to the law, I have the right to inherit his assets. Selena twisted her son's arm hard, and the boy reluctantly shouted, I do. The lawyer nodded. Legally, that is true, but you must first prove that you are Mr. Luis's son. Lucas, hearing this, immediately perked up, shouting, fine, I can prove it. No problem. But Selena quickly pulled him back, covering his mouth. She seemed a bit guilty and asked, now that Luis is dead, how can we prove it? It's simple, DNA testing, I said, watching the mother and son with great interest. Selena looked panicked, while Lucas seemed unaware of the situation. Lucas has been calling Luis his father for years. Can there still be any doubt? Selena stubbornly argued. Around us, people started murmuring about how the deceased should be respected, and that testing the DNA now wasn't appropriate. I exchanged a look with the lawyer before nodding. The inheritance can indeed be given to this child. Selena and her son looked pleased, but when they heard what I said next, their expressions changed to anger. It was like watching a Sichuan opera face change. But this child is still a minor, so the inheritance will be kept in a trust fund until he comes of age. As for the responsibility of supporting him, it will still fall to his guardian. Oh, that would be you, Selena. I then pulled out a thick stack of bank statements, all showing the money Luis had spent on Selena over the years. This child was born during the duration of my marriage to Luis. So you are the mistress. The money Luis spent on you over the years is considered marital property, and I have the right to reclaim it. If you don't repay within the given time frame, I will sue you directly. My set of moves completely stunned Selena. She no longer had the arrogance from before. Selena stuttered, unable to form a complete sentence. Turns out Selena is the mistress? I always thought she was a single mother and even felt sorry for her. The one who's pitiful is the wife. She stayed by his side through cancer treatment all these years. Finally, when he gets better, he's gone. Exactly. And now she shows up with the mistress and the illegitimate child. The wife sure is unlucky. Ugh. How can the mistress and the illegitimate child even show their faces? Don't they understand that the deceased should be respected? The whispers of the crowd seemed like they were going to break Selena and her son's backs. Seeing that the moment was right, I gave the eviction order. Selena walked away without a penny, and on top of that, she was being criticized as the mistress. She hurriedly left with her child. I turned to look at Luis's portrait, murmuring, Luis, It turns out you never had anyone who truly loved you. Chapter 6. Life without Luis was simply flying by. I hired a professional manager to handle the company for me. With a suitcase in hand, I traveled the world. This was something I'd never dared to imagine back in my student days. While I was sunbathing on a small island in the Caribbean, the system, which had been silent for a year, suddenly came back to life. It was that familiar, lazy electronic voice, still slightly distorted in my mind. Host. Long time no see. Lying on the beach, I lazily asked, "Where have you been this year?" "I went to further my studies." The system went to further its studies? Before I could ask this question, it interrupted me. "Host, there has been an unexpected change in your mission." The target suddenly awakened, realized the nature of the mission, and has bound a new task. I nodded. Now the target has been revived, and his task is to make you fall in love with him again. What the hell is this? How can a dead person come back to life? I already scattered his ashes. Can't you system people get it together? I've been enjoying life, and now you're telling me he's come back to life? The system sounded somewhat awkward. There's nothing I can do. He offered too much. He traded his freedom in the next life for this mission. I fell silent. I didn't expect Luis to be this bold. If he fails the mission, I won't be erased, right? I nervously asked the system. No, you won't. The system replied flatly. Our developer is a female engineer. She only makes the heartless men pay the price. Even if Luis fails the mission, only he will be erased. Hearing this, I let out a long breath. As long as I don't die, that's fine. So, do I need to go back to the country now? I reluctantly looked at the beach full of muscle-bound handsome guys and asked. No need, because Luis is already here. Host, good luck. With that, the system disappeared once again. No matter how much I called out, it wouldn't respond. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in a year suddenly sounded in my ear. Chapter 7. Diana. The familiar voice rang out. A figure blocked the sunlight in front of me. I looked up and saw Luis. He was the same as before, unchanged, just looking at me with joy. Diana, I finally get to see you again. Annoyed, I put on my sunglasses and stood up, preparing to head back to the hotel. He grabbed me and pulled me into his embrace. I know everything now. My death was your choice. You approached me with a purpose. I struggled for a moment, but his arms were like iron, and I couldn't break free. I decided to stop resisting and simply leaned back into his embrace. Calm, but I don't blame you. Diana, after dying once, I finally understand who I really love. I know you've always loved me. You liked me even back in school. This time, let me chase after you, okay? Luis's confession was sincere and full of emotion. When I looked up at him, I saw his eyes were red and filled with tears. He looked genuinely pitiful, but I was no longer the Diana who could be easily swayed by a few words. Just seeing his face made it impossible for me to forget all the lies he told me over the years. He even let another woman wear my pajamas and have fun in my bed. Luis. I suddenly laughed. You couldn't figure things out after 20 years. And now after dying once, you understand everything? You'd better die a few more times. Maybe you'll be the new Einstein. Luis was momentarily stunned by my words. In the past 20 years, I had never spoken to him like this. Most of the time, I had been gentle and understanding, always accommodating him. Now, my words were filled with thorns, and he definitely wasn't used to it. Diana, he frowned. I know you have grievances against me. Give me one chance. Let me chase after you again, please? Not far away. A blonde, blue-eyed, mixed-race handsome guy was walking toward me. He was my new boyfriend, Ryan. When he saw Luis, his gaze was filled with indifference, his attention fully on me. Baby, you look gorgeous today. How about we head to the room later? I've prepared a surprise for you. I pulled my hand free from Luis's grasp and happily placed it in the handsome guy's hand. Luis, panic-stricken, grabbed my other hand, his eyes red, tears streaming down his face. He gritted his teeth and threatened me with venom. Diana, don't you dare! I impatiently yanked my hand away. You really are pathetic. Luis didn't leave. He followed behind me. I was having drinks at the bar with Ryan, and Luis sat at a nearby booth, staring at me without a blink. Ryan accompanied me to dance, and Luis followed into the dance floor, standing next to me like a piece of wood. Next, whether I was eating, swimming, or watching a movie, even when I went to the bathroom, he stood by the door waiting for me, until I took Ryan's hand and headed to the hotel room. Luis couldn't take it any longer. "Diana, do you really want to do this?" He grabbed my wrist and yelled, as if he had caught his unfaithful wife. I looked at him, somewhat amused. "Sir, I think whatever I do now is none of your business, right? I am your husband." "Oh, but my current marital status is widowed," I said indifferently. Ryan, watching us both, burst out laughing. "Old man, are you trying to take advantage of a dead man's benefits?" Luis seemed to be deeply triggered by my words. He immediately shouted, "I'm not dead. I'm alive again. Diana, you can't do this to me." Ryan looked at him like he was crazy. His outburst quickly attracted the hotel security. A few security guards teamed up and forcibly escorted him out. The next morning, I stretched lazily and opened the door. I was startled by the figure standing in front of it. Luis was sitting at my door, arms crossed, dozing off. When he heard the door open, he rubbed his eyes, looked up, and immediately stood up when he saw me. "Diana, are you calm now?" He staggered toward me, trying to pull me into his embrace again. I quickly stepped aside. "I've been thinking all night. You deliberately made me angry by being with that guy yesterday. Are you calm now?" I suddenly thought this man had no shame. What kind of twisted logic made him come to such a conclusion? "Luis, do you really think so highly of yourself?" I rubbed my waist, unintentionally revealing the hickey on my neck. When Luis saw it, his eyes darkened, filled with unbearable pain. "Diana, now that you're calm, and you've had your fun, come back to me," he said, his voice filled with humility. Before I could respond, Ryan walked out of my room. He hugged me from behind, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Sis, did you enjoy yourself last night?" I squinted my eyes in enjoyment and nodded. "Did you think that what you just said was handsome and romantic?" I didn't look at Luis. Whether it's his face, his body, or even in bed, he's better than you. "So, what makes you think I'll come back to you?" I pointed at the man behind me, and he smiled, biting my finger. Luis, utterly enraged by this scene, completely lost his rationality. He yanked me away and punched Ryan in the face. I hurried to separate them, standing in front of Ryan. "Luis, what the hell is wrong with you? You can only be mine. You betrayed me." Luis's eyes were filled with hurt, and he choked on his words. I scoffed. "And what about you? Were you loyal during those 20 years? Chapter 8. Luis suddenly fell silent. He was kicked out of the hotel again and put on the blacklist. Feeling sorry for him, I took Ryan to the hospital. All along the way, he never asked me about Luis. He only said he would listen when I was ready to talk. I was deeply moved and leaned into his embrace. While I was paying at the hospital, I spotted a familiar figure at the window. I stared at the person for a while before confirming it was Selena. A year ago, after Luis died, I filed a lawsuit to recover the assets. Selena disappeared overnight with her child. 6 months ago, someone told me they saw her abroad, but I never expected to run into her again on this island in the Caribbean. Ryan went to get the car, and I stood alone at the hospital entrance. A few kids on skateboards skated by and bumped into me. I fell to the ground. Before I could react, a pair of large hands lifted me up from the ground. "Diana, are you okay? Let's go to the hospital and get checked." I rolled my eyes, thinking how unlucky I was, and struggled out of his embrace. I felt nauseated by him. Now, just the touch of his hand made me want to gag. "Why do you meddle so much?" I frowned and asked. "Diana, your business has never been a small thing." He had said these exact words to me 20 years ago. Back then, when we had just gotten together, we were always busy with work and paying off debts. I had to go to the emergency room for acute appendicitis one night. Luis rushed back from out of town in a hurry. At that time, he held my hand with concern and said those words. But after Selena returned to the country, The one who made him anxious was no longer me. I curled the corners of my lips and glanced at Selena not far away. Now, these words would be more appropriate for you to say to Selena. Luis became a little agitated, his voice unintentionally rising. What does Selena have to do with this? The one I love is you. The one I've been married to for 20 years is you. Selena is just an accident. Believe me, I will handle this accident. I smiled and nodded. All right. Then repeat those words to her. Without waiting for their response, I turned and got into Ryan's car. We drove away. After returning to the hotel, I had someone look into why Selena had come here. I found out that she had no money left and was living here illegally. She was surviving by doing drug trials at the hospital. As for the illegitimate child, there was no news of him. I had no idea how Luis had handled Selena. After that day at the hospital, I didn't see them again for an entire week. During that week, besides the yellow roses that appeared regularly at my door at a set time, there were countless pieces of jewelry. Today it was a luxurious seafood feast. Tomorrow a full set of high-end jewelry. Even Ryan said that if he were a woman, he would be touched. I was indifferent to these things. The delicious food and drinks went to the staff, and the luxury jewelry was quickly sold off for charity. By the 8th day, I could no longer hold back and called out to the system. When will Luis be erased? The system yawned and lazily replied. His situation is a bit tricky right now. To make him give up, it might take some time. Selena exposed the news that he's still alive, and now she's clinging to him, asking for money. I listened to the system's report, frowning slightly. Ryan leaned close to me, greedily smelling the scent of the body wash on me. What's wrong? Did you run into some trouble? I looked at him apologetically. Looks like I might have to trouble you to play the role of a mistress for a while. I thought it was something serious. He laughed, holding my hand. As long as you love me, don't worry. I'd be willing to be the mistress, the 4th, or the 5th even. Chapter 9. I took the initiative to contact Luis. When he saw me, his eyes were filled with light. As soon as he laid eyes on me, he eagerly moved toward me. Diana, you've finally calmed down. I raised my hand to stop him. Now the outside world knows that you faked your death. So our marriage is still valid. I brought you here today to get a divorce. Luis was somewhat surprised. No way. As long as I'm alive, you can't divorce me. Actually, there's a simpler way. You can just give up the mission. Get erased. And I won't have to go through all this trouble. My words seemed to wound him deeply. He lowered his eyes and begged, looking at me with a pleading expression. Don't you really want to give me another chance? I didn't respond and stood up, preparing to leave. He also stood up, trying to entangle me. Then, he was interrupted by Selena. I hadn't seen Selena in a year, and she had lost all her previous grace and refinement. The year of drug trials had left her face swollen, and her body was out of shape. Her hair was greasy, and her ill-fitting clothes were stained with dirt. Following Selena was that illegitimate child. Lucas. Luis. Do you no longer want us? Mother and son? Do you have any idea how we've been living all this time? Selena, holding the child, directly knelt in front of him and began crying. This bitch Diana wants to reclaim the assets and gave your inheritance to the foundation. Now, mother and son have nothing, and I had to run away with Lucas. Luis, you heartless man, are you going to abandon us now? Selena cried loudly, not forgetting to pull her son into her sobs. A year had passed, and the child, no longer as restrained as he was at the morning hall, had become just as insane as his mother. Dad, I've never been able to live with you. You always told me to wait, but my mom and I have waited for so many years. And now you're begging for another woman's forgiveness. Diana is the mistress. The mistress! Luis was getting a headache from the shouting of these two. At first, he felt some pity for them, but when he heard the kid call me a mistress, he suddenly lost his temper. He slapped the child across the face. Stop talking nonsense. Your mother is the mistress, and you're the illegitimate child. You two should be grateful you've made it this far because of Diana's kind heart. Lucas was stunned by the slap, staring at Luis in shock. After a long pause, he stammered, Mom said that only the unloved are the mistresses. Diana is the mistress. Smack! Another slap. Selena screamed and rushed toward Luis, clawing at him. Lucas tried to help his mother, attempting to strike Luis. I stood behind them, arms crossed, watching the entire farce unfold. Today, not only did I invite Luis, but I had also invited Selena. I told her Luis was with me, and she immediately brought the child over. Hidden behind a potted plant was a phone, streaming everything that had just happened. And just like that, I pulled away Luis's last bit of dignity from the last 20 years. I'm sure the internet was now ablaze with blood and chaos. Onlookers, confused by what was happening, called the police. The police quickly arrived and took us all to the station. Chapter 10. When we were released from the station, Luis, ignoring Selena's pulling and cursing, ran straight to my side, his face covered in bruises. Diana, you saw it today. I have nothing to do with Selena anymore. Can you forgive me? I stood on the side of the road, waiting for Ryan, without looking at him. Diana, what do I have to do for you to forgive me? If apologies were useful, then why would we need the police? I asked him with a smile, though the smile didn't reach my eyes. Everything that happened today, the domestic netizens must already know. You should start thinking about how to divide the assets. After hearing my words, Luis narrowed his eyes, a hint of displeasure in his tone. Are you plotting against me? I impatiently responded. Maybe, but you've been plotting against me for years. When I traveled across the country to find top doctors for you, you were off with Selena. When I carried the company on my own, you were enjoying life with Selena. Luis, all of this is what you owe me, but it's Selena, that bitch, who seduced me, he yelled. I've always loved you, Diana. I just realized it a little too late, Luis cried out, holding my hand, burying his face in my palm. I could feel the moisture in my hand. It must have been his sincere tears. Did Selena force you to cheat? Did I force you to have children with someone else? Luis, you are nothing but a greedy, shameless bastard with no sense of responsibility. Stop making excuses for yourself right now. You're truly disgusting to me. Luis slowly lifted his head, tears in his eyes. His shoulders suddenly slumped. Just divorce me quickly, if you still have any conscience. After that, I turned around and got into Ryan's car. Chapter 11. The Caribbean has recently entered the rainy season. The island is often drenched by sudden heavy rains. During this time, I've been waiting for the flights to resume, spending every day with Ryan in the hotel. At that moment, Luis appeared outside my window. The torrential rain had soaked him to the bone. He stood in the garden outside, staring blankly at my room's window. Ryan leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window, his tone somewhat sympathetic. Maybe we should let him in? If he stays out there in the rain, I'm afraid he'll get seriously sick. That's fine. I'll be a widow, and I won't have to divorce him again. I busied myself with the company's financial reports, not even looking up. The next morning, the weather finally cleared. Luis was still curled up, sitting outside my window. Ryan approached, checked his temperature, and took him to the hospital. Afterward, we gathered our luggage and headed to the airport, flying back to the country. I saw Luis again a week later. He came back with Selena and Lucas. We had agreed to meet at the law office to sign the divorce agreement. The moment he saw me, Luis's face was full of hope and joy. Diana, that day when you took me to the hospital, you must have been worried about me, right? Have you forgiven me? I looked at him mockingly. Your imagination would be wasted if you didn't write melodramatic romance stories. Selena followed closely behind Luis, immediately rolling her eyes at me when she saw me. Hurry up and sign the divorce agreement. Once the cooling-off period is over, we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I ignored her eye roll and walked into the meeting room. Since Luis was the one at fault, he insisted on leaving with nothing. After the agreement was signed, Selena threw a tantrum in front of the law office, yelling at Luis for being heartless. I put on my sunglasses and turned to leave, but unexpectedly, Luis shouted after me, Diana, I'll definitely win you back. Without turning back, I walked straight out of the law office. How unlucky! After the divorce, Luis didn't give up. He continued to pester me both abroad and domestically. He held a press conference and admitted to his infidelity in front of the national media, apologizing to me. He then made a heartfelt confession, saying that the divorce was so that he could be with me in a better way. He even said he would prepare a grand wedding to make up for the regrets of the past. I scoffed at all of this. Ryan and I quietly registered our marriage. On the day we announced the news, it happened to coincide with the day Luis planned to propose to me live. He stood outside the hotel, holding a diamond ring worth millions, surrounded by reporters, waiting for me. But Ryan and I appeared holding our marriage certificate. All of Luis's efforts over the past few days became a joke. Ryan even directly mocked him in front of the media. "Old man, what's the point of playing the wayward man returning to the fold act at your age? Where were you all these years?" Luis kneeled on one knee, staring in shock at the marriage certificate in my hand, the diamond ring falling to the ground. "Dear media friends, my marriage to Mr. Luis is now in the past." Seizing the moment when he hadn't reacted, I directly announced my marriage to the public. "This is my current husband, Mr. Ryan. We hope everyone will bless us." Ryan and I smiled happily. Accepting interviews from the media, Luis looked completely despondent and collapsed to the ground. "This isn't right. This shouldn't be happening. Diana, you must be playing with me. You're still angry, aren't you?" He went mad, grabbing my neck in front of the camera and shouting. Ryan quickly kicked him away, disdainfully saying, "How dare you touch my dear? You truly don't know your place." As Luis was getting up, ready to rush at me, Selena suddenly appeared. She swung the knife in her hand and yelled as she lunged at Luis. "You heartless bastard! How dare you abandon me? I gave you a son. I followed you for 20 years without recognition or status." With a thud, the knife plunged into Luis's abdomen. Blood immediately started to pour out. A gasp echoed through the crowd. The reporters' cameras immediately focused on Luis and Selena. No one could have expected that the media, originally invited by Luis to witness his moment of happiness, was now covering his life-threatening situation. Selena was quickly restrained by the police, and Luis was rushed to the hospital. Everything he had carefully planned turned into a joke. Chapter 12. Luis woke up 3 days later. The moment he regained consciousness, he insisted on seeing me. When my assistant told me about it, I was preparing to go on a honeymoon with Ryan. Ryan glanced at me, seeking my opinion. "There's nothing to see. Let him deal with it on his own." Ryan waved his hand, dismissing the assistant. "Aren't you curious about how Luis will react when he finds out about that illegitimate child?" The gleam in his eyes sparkled. Mischievous. I wasn't particularly interested in this matter. After all, whether Luis was alive or dead no longer concerned me. But seeing Ryan so curious, I felt it was necessary to indulge his curiosity. I followed him to the hospital. Luis, due to oxygen deprivation, had become paralyzed. He sat in a wheelchair, looking utterly dejected. When he saw me, his eyes still sparkled with a glimmer of hope. "Uncle, we're here on someone's behalf." I didn't speak. It was Ryan who spoke. "Ms. Selena refuses to cooperate with the lawyer and only wants to meet you. I know your physical condition doesn't allow for much, so I'm here to convey Ms. Selena's request. She wants you to take care of your son." Luis couldn't speak fully now, only nodding. Then he looked at me with deep affection. "By the way," Ryan stood in front of me, blocking his view. "About your illegitimate child. Here's a DNA test done by the police. We hope you take a look. I think you have the right to know this." Luis, holding on to Ryan's hand, read through the paternity test report. Furious, he slammed his head into the papers, knocking them aside. He let out a growl from his throat, unable to say anything for a long time. His eyes rolled back in his head. The doctors rushed to his aid. Before he was wheeled into the operating room, he still had some awareness left. I watched him being unceremoniously thrown onto the stretcher and couldn't help but laugh. "Luis, you're truly pathetic." Chapter 13. Selena was locked away for good. The illegitimate child couldn't inherit Luis's fortune because he wasn't Luis's son. Luis also had no obligation to support him. The child was sent to an orphanage. Due to his bad temper, he was often ostracized by the other children there. One day, unable to stand the isolation anymore, he sneaked out in the middle of the night, planning to find Luis. However, on the way to the hospital, he was struck by a speeding car driven by someone under the influence. He was thrown 100 meters and died on the spot despite efforts to revive him. After marrying Ryan, we began traveling around the world. The next time I received news about Luis was 2 years later. The long-missed voice of the system echoed in my mind again. Host. Long time no see. After such a long time, I found myself somewhat nostalgic for that familiar electronic voice. Been training again this whole time? Of course not. I've been staying with you in another way. The system was no longer lazy. Now speaking in a more serious tone, the system shows that Luis has given up on his mission and will soon be erased. He requests to see you. I stretched lazily. Whether he's dead or alive, it's none of my business. Luis's last will states that all his assets are to be left to you. I poured myself a glass of water, nodding slightly, since he left me with nothing during the divorce. And now he has no assets left. The will didn't make much of a difference. I looked around the room, but Ryan was nowhere to be seen. He usually couldn't stay away from me for long. I wondered where he had gone today. System. Do you know where my husband went? I don't know why, but I asked the question out of the blue. The system suddenly went silent. No matter how many times I called, there was no response. Just as I was growing confused, a familiar voice suddenly sounded from behind me. Host. I'm here. I turned around to see Ryan's handsome face smiling at the door, looking at me. Host. I forgot to tell you, the system you bound was a lifetime one, for the rest of your life. I'll be here with you, never abandoning you.